The Hanseong Pharmaceutical Tower glowed with sterile white light and the hum of profit, but for Min Suk, the halls were a tomb. Lee Min Suk's wrists burned against the leather restraints. The gurney was cold beneath his spine, but not as cold as Dr. Choi's eyes scanning the data on his tablet. Around them, the experimental wing hummed with the efficiency of a machine that had long forgotten it processed human bodies. Trial 47B shows suboptimal enzyme production, Dr. Choi muttered, stylus tapping against the screen. He didn't look at Min Suk, hadn't looked at him properly in 3 years. You're our most valuable asset, Min Suk SSI, but assets that fail to perform become liabilities. The consent form appeared on the tablet, glowing with clinical precision. High-dose suppressant protocol, Phase 3. Previous mortality rate, 100%. I won't sign it. Min Suk's voice cracked from disuse and dehydration. The tablet screen went dark. For the first time that day, Dr. Choi met his eyes. Company property doesn't get to say no. 20 minutes later, security threw him into the Seoul winter. The loading dock door slammed shut behind him with the finality of a coffin lid. Min Suk wore nothing but a blood-stained medical gown that snapped like paper in the wind. The suppressants they'd force-fed him that morning were wearing off, making every nerve scream as February air cut through fabric and skin alike. He made it 3 blocks. His legs gave out between 2 warehouses, and he collapsed into an alley where snow had already begun to erase the evidence of the city's cruelty. The cold was a mercy. It would kill him faster than the bleeding or the withdrawal. Min Suk closed his eyes and waited for the numbness. The growl of an engine pulled him back. Through the haze of hypothermia, he saw a black Mercedes idle at the alley's mouth, exhaust curling like smoke in the darkness. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, sharp-featured, wearing a coat worth more than Min Suk's entire existence. He took one look at the Omega dying in the snow, flicked his cigarette into a puddle, and spoke with the kind of authority that made buildings bend. Get him. Now. Kong Seo-jin knelt in the snow and lifted Min Suk with hands that knew violence but chose gentleness. For the first time in Lee Min Suk's life, someone looked at him like he was worth saving. A man for whom he would soon become the reason Seoul's pharmaceutical empire burned to ash. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers and tell me where you're watching from. The warehouse district smelled of diesel and old blood, scents Seo-jin had long stopped noticing. He stood with his back to the loading bay door, watching Choi Dae-young's hands shake as the man tried to explain why this month's shipment was 30% short. The border checkpoints have been. I don't pay you to give me excuses, Dae-young SSI. Seo-jin's voice was level, almost conversational. That made it worse. I pay you to deliver what I purchase. Behind him, his Lieutenant Yoon Tae-min shifted his weight. The movement was subtle, practiced, a warning to the suppliers that their window for negotiation was closing. Dae-young's associate, a thin man whose name Seo-jin hadn't bothered learning, looked ready to bolt. We can have the full shipment by Thursday. You'll have it by tomorrow midnight, or I'll find suppliers who understand the concept of a deadline. Seo-jin turned toward the door. The meeting was over. Tae-min, make sure they. Boss. Tae-min's phone was already out, his expression shifting from enforcer to something more uncertain. We have a situation. Alley behind the warehouse. Kim found something. Seo-jin's jaw tightened. In his line of work, something was never good. What kind of something? He says you should see for yourself. The alley was narrow, choked with industrial debris and the kind of darkness that Seoul's neon never quite reached. Kim stood at the entrance, radio in hand, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. When he saw Seo-jin approach, he straightened. Sir, we were doing the perimeter check like you ordered, and... Kim gestured vaguely toward the shadows. There's someone. We think they're still alive, but barely. Seo-jin moved past him without responding. His eyes adjusted to the dimness, cataloging the scene with the efficiency of someone who'd seen too many bodies in too many alleys. This one wasn't dead yet, but it was close. A figure curled against the brick wall, half buried in snow that was already stained pink in places. The clothing, if you could call it that, was medical grade, thin as paper. Jesus Christ, Tae-min muttered behind him. Is that a hospital gown? Seo-jin knelt beside the body. Up close, he could see the details. Ligature marks on the wrists, bruising that mapped weeks of rough handling, lips blue from hypothermia. But it was the scent that stopped him cold. Beneath the acrid chemical burn of industrial suppressants, beneath the copper tang of blood and the staleness of medical antiseptic, there was something else. Clean. Pine in winter. Rain on stone. And underneath it all, a resonance that made Seo-jin's alpha hindbrain wake up and pay attention, omega, rare, and in severe distress. Boss, we should call it in. Taemin crouched beside him, keeping his voice low. This is a complication we don't need. Could be a plant, could be someone's property dispute. He's dying. All the more reason to. Get the car. Seojin was already sliding his arms beneath the Omega's shoulders and knees, lifting with a gentleness that made Taemin's eyes widen. The body was lighter than it should be, all angles and atrophied muscle. Now, Taemin. Sir, with respect, we have no idea who this is or what we're stepping into. If he's tagged, if he's contracted. The car. Seojin's tone left no room for negotiation. He stood, cradling the unconscious Omega against his chest. Through the thin gown, he could feel the rapid flutter of a failing heartbeat, the fever heat of suppressant withdrawal fighting against the ice of hypothermia. We're taking him to the penthouse. Dr. Han will meet us there. Taemin's jaw worked, but he pulled out his phone. Behind them, Kim and the other men exchanged glances that said everything about how unprecedented this was. Kang Seojin didn't pick up strays. Kang Seojin didn't carry anyone anywhere. Kang Seojin certainly didn't risk his operation for dying Omegas in alleys. The Mercedes pulled up with its engine purring, and Seojin slid into the back seat, still holding his burden. The Omega's head lolled against his shoulder, dark hair matted with melted snow and dried blood. This close, the scent was stronger, cutting through the suppressants like light through fog. Boss, Taemin tried one more time, climbing into the front passenger seat. You know this is going to raise questions we might not want to answer. Seojin looked down at the face pressed against his coat, too thin, too pale, but somehow still fighting to breathe. Then we'll answer them. The Mercedes pulled away from the warehouse district, leaving the suppliers and their excuses behind. In the warmth of the car, the Omega made a sound, barely more than a whimper, and Seojin's arms tightened reflexively. Drive faster, he said quietly. Minsuk woke to softness, and that was wrong. The pharmaceutical wing beds were metal frame and vinyl, easy to sanitize, designed for bodies that were inventory rather than people. This was fabric, expensive, high-thread count, the kind that whispered against skin instead of crackling. He forced his eyes open and immediately regretted it. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Seoul's skyline like a painting, dawn breaking over glass towers that looked tiny from this height. The room was carved from darkness and luxury. Black marble floors caught the morning light and swallowed it. The walls were the deep gray of storm clouds, broken only by abstract art that probably cost more than Minsuk's life was worth to Hanseong. Even the ceiling seemed impossibly high, making the space feel less like a bedroom and more like a temple to wealth and power. Don't try to sit up yet. Minsuk's head snapped toward the voice, too fast, making the room tilt sideways. A woman in her 50s stood beside the bed, medical bag open on the nightstand. She wore designer frames and the kind of calm that came from seeing everything twice. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking the 4-line running into his arm. I'm Dr. Han Ju-won. You've been unconscious for 18 hours. She pulled a penlight from her pocket. Follow the light with your eyes only. Minsuk obeyed, his body responding to medical authority before his brain could catch up. The light tracked left, right, up, down. Dr. Han made a satisfied noise and clicked the penlight off. Moderate hypothermia, suppressant withdrawal, malnutrition, and assorted contusions consistent with repeated physical restraint. She said it clinically, like reading a grocery list. You're stable now, but you'll need at least a week of rest and proper nutrition. The suppressants I've administered are pharmaceutical grade. None of that black market poison that was destroying your system. Minsuk's throat was sandpaper. Where? You're safe. Dr. Han began repacking her bag with the efficiency of someone who'd done this in far worse circumstances. That's all you need to know right now. I'll be back this evening to check your vitals. She left without waiting for questions, and Minsuk was alone with the skyline and the uncomfortable realization that he was wearing clothes he didn't remember putting on. Soft cotton pants, a shirt that actually fit his frame. No hospital gown. No restraints. No cameras in the corners tracking his every movement. The door opened again, and this time it was the man from the snow. He was taller than Minsuk remembered, broader through the shoulders, dressed in black slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. In the warehouse district darkness, he looked dangerous. In the morning light of his own territory, he looked absolutely lethal. All sharp angles and controlled power, the kind of alpha who didn't need to raise his voice to make a room hold its breath. You're awake. He carried a tray, which seemed absurd given everything else about him. Dr. Han said you'd need to eat slowly. Your stomach won't handle much yet. Minsuk watched him set the tray on the bed, rice porridge, still steaming, with banchan arranged like someone had actually cared about presentation. Real food. Not the nutrient-paced Hanseong fed him between trials. Who are you? Kong Seojin. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, moving with the kind of grace that suggested violence was always an option, just not the first one. And you are? Lee Min-suk. The name felt strange in his mouth, like something he hadn't used in years. At Hanseong, they'd called him Subject 09, or occasionally his employee number. Why am I here? Because I found you dying in an alley, and I don't leave people to freeze. Seojin's voice was level, matter of fact. Eat. We can talk after. Min-suk's hands shook as he picked up the spoon. The porridge was perfectly seasoned, warm without being scalding, gentle on a stomach that had forgotten what kindness tasted like. He ate 3 bites before the tears started, hot and humiliating against his cheeks. I'm sorry, I don't. He tried to wipe his face with his sleeve, mortified. I don't usually. It's the withdrawal. Seojin's expression didn't change, but something in his voice softened. Industrial suppressants mess with your neurochemistry. Dr. Han said the emotional volatility should stabilize in a few days. Min-suk nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He finished the porridge in silence while Seojin waited with the patience of someone who'd learned that some conversations couldn't be rushed. When the bowl was empty, Seojin stood and retrieved something from the dresser, a small white bag with a pharmacy label. These are suppressants. Medical grade, properly dosed for your weight and presentation. Dr. Han said the ones they were giving you were essentially industrial solvents with a sedative component. He set the bag on the nightstand. They won't hurt. Min-suk stared at the bag like it might bite him. What do you want from me? Nothing. Nobody does this for nothing. Seojin was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. You don't owe me anything. Not gratitude, not loyalty, not your story if you're not ready to tell it. But I need to know who did this to you. Why? Because people who throw living beings into the snow to die need to learn there are consequences. Seojin's expression was carved marble, beautiful and terrifying. And because whoever they are, they're going to come looking for their property. I need to know what we're preparing for. Min-suk looked at the suppressants, at the expensive room, at the alpha sitting beside his bed like a guardian carved from shadow. In the pharmaceutical tower, they'd told him he was worthless except for what they could extract from him. This man had carried him through the snow and asked for nothing. Hanseong Pharmaceutical, Min-suk whispered. They've owned me since I was 7. Seojin's expression didn't change, but something dark and satisfied flickered behind his eyes. Not anymore. Seojin's office occupied the penthouse's eastern wing, all dark wood and technology that hummed quietly in the background. 3 monitors glowed on the desk, casting blue light across Taemin's face as he scrolled through documents that had cost them 2 bribes and 1 very nervous records clerk. It's worse than we thought, Taemin said without preamble. He'd been working for 18 hours straight, fueled by coffee and the particular kind of rage that came from reading about institutionalized cruelty. Hanseong didn't just abuse him. They built their entire suppressant division on his biology. Seojin stood at the window, watching Seoul's traffic crawl through the streets 40 floors below. Behind him, he could hear the click of keys as Taemin pulled up another file. Start from the beginning. Lee Min-suk, born April 15, 1999, to Lee Ji-hoon and Park Mi-young. Both parents died in a car accident when he was 6, drunk driver, head-on collision on the Olympic Expressway. Taemin's voice was flat, professional, the way it always got when the details were bad. He went into state care. 6 months later, he presented as Omega during a routine medical examination at the group home. And that's when Hanseong found him. Not found. Purchased. Taemin pulled up a scanned contract, the ink faded but still legible. The state sold his medical custody to Hanseong Pharmaceutical under the pretense of specialized Omega healthcare. He was 7 years old. The contract gave them legal authority over his medical decisions until age 25, with options to extend. Seojin's jaw tightened. That's illegal under the Omega Protection Act. It was. Is. But Hanseong has enough politicians in their pocket to make paperwork disappear. The group home administrator who signed off on the transfer retired to Jeju 2 months later with enough money to buy a beachfront property. Taemin clicked to another file. Here's where it gets worse. Worse than selling a child to medical experimentation? Boss, they weren't experimenting on him. They were harvesting him. Taemin turned the monitor so Seojin could see the biochemical analysis, pages of enzyme breakdowns and molecular structures that looked more like ransom demands than medical reports. Min-suk's Omega Biology produces a compound they're calling enzyme OS-09. It's a naturally occurring suppressant catalyst that's apparently rarer than a royal flush. Most omegas produce trace amounts. He produces concentrations they can actually extract and synthesize. Seojin moved closer to the desk, scanning the documents with the focus of someone who'd learned to read medical reports out of necessity. The numbers were staggering. Weekly extractions, monthly baseline measurements, quarterly deep tissue biopsies that were clearly just torture with a medical justification. How much are they making off this? Taemin pulled up a financial spreadsheet that had taken their hacker, Kim Sang-woo, 3 days to decrypt. Their suppressant line, branded as OptimaSuppress, generates approximately 200 billion won annually. It's their flagship product. 70% of the Omega population in Seoul uses some variation of it. The room was very quiet. Outside, a helicopter passed, its lights blinking against the darkness. He's not a victim, Seojin said slowly. He's their entire pharmaceutical empire. Yes. Taemin closed the financial file and opened another. This one was a research proposal dated 3 weeks ago. And they know he's missing. This is a memo from Director Park Jae-sung to the board of directors. They've declared him a critical asset loss and authorized a recovery budget of 50 billion won. They're coming for him. They're coming hard. Park's already hired the Gwangju Syndicate as external contractors. Lee Dong-wook's people specialize in Omega retrieval. Taemin's expression was grim. They're not subtle, and they don't care about collateral damage. Seojin was quiet for a long moment, his mind already running through defensive scenarios and offensive strikes. Does Min-suk know? About what they were doing? I don't think so. The extraction procedures were always labeled as routine medical care. Blood work, tissue samples, wellness checks. They kept him sedated for most of the intensive harvesting. Taemin pulled up a medical log that showed sedation schedules going back years. He probably thought he was just sick. That's what they told him, that he had a condition that required constant monitoring. The door opened, and both men turned. Min-suk stood in the doorway, wearing clothes Seojin had ordered that morning, black jeans and a soft gray sweater that made him look younger than 26, more vulnerable. He'd showered, his hair still damp, and the bruises on his neck were starting to fade from purple to yellow. Dr. Han said I should walk around, get my blood moving. Min-suk's eyes moved from Seojin to the monitors, to Taemin's guilty expression. What are you looking at? Seojin exchanged a glance with Taemin, then made a decision. Your medical records. We needed to understand what Hanseong was doing to you. Min-suk moved into the room slowly, like he was approaching a trap. Anne, come see for yourself. It took Min-suk 10 minutes to read through the files. Seojin watched his expression change, confusion, then disbelief, then a dawning horror that made something in Seojin's chest constrict. Taemin had the good sense to stay quiet, letting Min-suk process at his own pace. I don't understand. Min-suk's voice was very small. They said the treatments were helping me. That I had a degenerative condition. You don't have a condition. Seojin kept his tone gentle, which took effort. You have a gift. A rare biological trait that produces compounds most omegas can't. Hanseong discovered it when you were 7 and built an empire on it. Min-suk scrolled through another page, his hands starting to shake. The extractions. Every week they'd sedate me and take samples. They said it was monitoring my health. They were harvesting enzyme concentrations from your cerebrospinal fluid, bone marrow, and endocrine glands. Taemin pulled up a medical schematic that showed exactly where they'd been extracting. Every sample they took went directly to their pharmaceutical production line. You weren't a patient. You were their manufacturing plant. The tablet slipped from Min-suk's hands. Seojin caught it before it hit the floor, then caught Min-suk when his legs gave out. He guided him to the leather chair by the window, keeping a steadying hand on his shoulder. 200 billion won, Min-suk whispered. They were making that much from my body? Annually. Seojin crouched beside the chair, bringing himself to eye level. You're not just a victim they abused, Min-suk. You're the reason Hanseong Pharmaceutical is one of the largest companies in Korea. Without you, their entire suppressant division collapses. Min-suk looked up, and his eyes were red but dry. They're going to come for me. Yes. And you can't stop them. They have money, lawyers, politicians. I have something better. Seojin's smile was sharp enough to cut. I have patience, resources, and absolutely no interest in playing by their rules. They built an empire on your suffering. Let's see how it feels when someone burns it down around them. Taemin cleared his throat from the desk. Boss, if we're doing this, we need to move carefully. Park Jae-sung didn't get where he is by being stupid. He'll have contingencies. Then we'll have better ones. Seojin stood, his decision made. Pull everything we have on Hanseong's supply chain, their investor relationships, their political connections. I want to know every pressure point, every weakness, every skeleton in every closet. That's going to take time. We have time. Min-suk isn't going anywhere. Seo-jin looked down at the Omega in his chair, whose expression had shifted from shock to something harder, more determined. And when we move, we're going to do it right. Scorched earth. No second chances. Min-suk met his eyes. Why are you doing this? Seo-jin was quiet for a moment. Because they threw you away like garbage. Because they treated you like property instead of a person. Because someone needs to teach them that there are consequences for cruelty. He paused. And because I can. That seemed to be enough. Min-suk nodded slowly, then turned back to the monitors, scrolling through files that documented 18 years of systematic exploitation. His hands had stopped shaking. When he spoke again, his voice was steady. I want to help. I know how their systems work, their schedules, their security protocols. If you're going after them, I want to be part of it. Seo-jin and Taemin exchanged looks. Then Seo-jin smiled, a real one this time, not the dangerous kind. Welcome to the war, Min-suk. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers, and tell me where you're watching from. The first strike happened on a Tuesday, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. Min-suk watched from the penthouse windows as Seo-jin ended a phone call with nothing more than, "It's done." Below, somewhere in the port district, a shipping container full of raw pharmaceutical materials had just been rerouted to a warehouse in Busan instead of Hanseong's processing facility in Seoul. The shipment would arrive 3 days late, and by then, the temperature-sensitive compounds would be worthless. That's 15 million won of materials they can't replace quickly, Taemin said from the conference table, where he'd spread out a map of Hanseong's entire supply network like a general planning a siege. Their production line for Optimus Press will stall for at least a week. Good. Seo-jin returned to his laptop, fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. What about the investor meeting? Scheduled for Friday. We have someone inside who'll make sure the leaked documents reach the right hands an hour before Park starts his presentation. Min-suk moved closer to the table, studying the map with its red pins marking Hanseong facilities and blue lines tracking their supply chains. 3 weeks ago, he'd been strapped to a gurney in one of those facilities. Now he was watching Seo-jin dismantle them piece by piece, and the precision of it was almost hypnotic. You're not just attacking them, Min-suk said quietly. You're bleeding them. Seo-jin looked up, and something approving flickered in his expression. Fast wars get messy. People notice. This way, it looks like bad luck, poor management, unfortunate coincidences. By the time Park realizes someone's orchestrating it, he'll be too busy putting out fires to mount an effective defense. How long will this take? As long as it needs to. Seo-jin closed his laptop. Revenge isn't a sprint, Min-suk. It's a marathon, and the winner is whoever has more patience. The leaked documents hit on Friday morning, exactly as planned. Min-suk sat in Seo-jin's office, watching Korean business news on the monitor while drinking coffee that actually tasted like something other than burnt water. The anchor's expression was carefully neutral as she reported on concerning allegations regarding Hanseong Pharmaceuticals' clinical trial practices. Sources have provided documentation suggesting that Hanseong may have conducted unauthorized human trials using non-consenting subjects, including minors. The company has denied these allegations, but several major investors have reportedly requested emergency meetings with the board of directors. Taemin walked in carrying his own coffee and a satisfied smirk. Park is losing his mind right now. Our contact says he spent 20 minutes screaming at his IT department about security breaches. He's looking in the wrong direction, Seo-jin said without looking away from his own screen. He thinks this is corporate espionage. He doesn't know it's personal yet. Min-suk watched Seo-jin work with the focused calm of someone performing surgery. Every move was calculated, every strike precise. There was no anger in it, no rage, just cold, methodical destruction. It should have been frightening. Instead, Min-suk found it reassuring. This was someone who finished what he started. The investors are spooked, Taemin continued, pulling up financial data. Hanseong's stock dropped 8% in the first hour of trading. If it drops another 5%, they'll trigger circuit breakers. Let it drop. Seo-jin finally looked up, and his smile was surgical. Fear is more valuable than facts. Once investors start pulling money, others will follow just to avoid being last. Min-suk set down his coffee cup. He'll retaliate. Park isn't stupid. Eventually he'll figure out who's behind this. I'm counting on it. Seo-jin's voice was soft, almost gentle. The Guangzhou syndicate he hired to find you? They've been asking questions in the wrong neighborhoods, making noise. When Park realizes he's up against me, he'll either escalate or fold. Either way, we win. How? If he escalates, he'll make mistakes. Desperate people always do. And if he folds? Seo Jin leaned back in his chair, the picture of relaxed confidence. Then Hanseong Pharmaceutical will quietly disappear into bankruptcy, and you'll never have to worry about them again. Taemin's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then showed the screen to Seo Jin. Director Park just canceled his afternoon meetings. His assistant says he's in emergency conference calls with legal. Phase 2, then. Seo Jin stood, moving to the windows. Seoul stretched out below them, all glass and steel, and millions of people who had no idea that empires were toppling 40 floors above their heads. Send the tip to the FDA Regulatory Board. Anonymous, untraceable. Make sure they know about the OS-09 extractions. Minsuk's breath caught. That will trigger a full investigation. Yes. Seo Jin turned to face him, and his expression was carved marble. And when government regulators start asking questions, Park won't be able to lie his way out. The evidence is too concrete, too damning. Hanseong will spend the next year drowning in audits and legal fees. They might come after me harder. If they're desperate, let them try. The promise in Seo Jin's voice was absolute. They'll find out exactly how expensive that mistake is. 2 weeks later, Minsuk was starting to understand the architecture of Seo Jin's war. It wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was death by 1,000 calculated cuts, each one small enough to seem like isolated bad luck, but together forming a pattern of systematic destruction. Suppliers who'd worked with Hanseong for decades suddenly found better offers elsewhere. Research scientists received job offers from competitors at double their current salary. Political allies who'd protected Park's operations quietly distanced themselves as the media scrutiny intensified. Minsuk watched it all from the penthouse, learning. Seo Jin never raised his voice, never showed anger, never made threats he wasn't prepared to execute. Power, Minsuk realized, wasn't about being the loudest person in the room. It was about being the most patient, the most thorough, the one who planned 10 moves ahead while everyone else was still reacting to move 3. You're different, Minsuk said one evening. They were in the living room, Seo Jin reviewing reports while Minsuk pretended to read a book he'd stopped processing 20 pages ago. From what I expected. Seo Jin looked up. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone more. Minsuk searched for the right word. Violent. The city talks about you like you're a monster. I can be. Seo Jin's voice was matter of fact. When the situation requires it. But violence is inefficient. It creates problems, draws attention, leaves evidence. This, he gestured at the reports spread across the coffee table. This is cleaner. More permanent. You're destroying an entire company. I'm destroying a company that tortured you for 18 years and profited from it. Seo Jin set aside his tablet. There's a difference. One is random cruelty. The other is justice that took its time arriving. Minsuk was quiet, processing. You really think you can win? I already am winning. Park just doesn't know he's lost yet. The news notification pinged on Seo Jin's phone. He glanced at it, and something satisfied flickered across his face before he handed the device to Minsuk. The headline read, Hanseong Pharmaceutical faces criminal investigation for unauthorized human experimentation. The regulatory board moved faster than I expected, Seo Jin said. Park's going to be arrested by the end of the week. Minsuk stared at the headline, at the carefully worded article that described years of abuse without naming him specifically. His hands weren't shaking. He felt strangely calm, like watching a storm from behind bulletproof glass. What happens after he's arrested? The company will try to restructure, cut ties with Park, pretend this was all his doing. But the damage is done. Their stock is already in free fall. Their research division is hemorrhaging talent. Their political protection is evaporating. Seo Jin took back his phone. Within 6 months, Hanseong will either be sold for parts or cease to exist. And me? Seo Jin met his eyes, and for once, the careful control slipped enough to show something warmer underneath. You'll be free. Legally, financially, completely. No contracts, no ownership, no company that can claim any part of you. Minsuk thought about that. Real freedom. Not just the absence of restraints, but the actual ability to choose his own path. It felt impossible and inevitable at the same time. Thank you, he said finally. Don't thank me yet. Seo Jin's smile was sharp. Park's not finished. Cornered animals bite hardest right before they die, and he still has the Guangzhou syndicate on his payroll. They're going to make a move soon. How do you know? Because that's what I would do. Jean stood, moving to the windows where Seoul glittered in the darkness. When you're losing everything, you make one desperate play to change the game. Park will come for you, probably within the next 2 weeks. And when he does, we'll be ready. Min-suk joined him at the window, studying his reflection in the glass. Less hollow than 3 weeks ago, less broken. I'm not afraid. You should be. Fear keeps you sharp. Jean glanced at him. But not paralyzed. There's a difference. Below them, the city breathed and moved, oblivious to the war being waged in penthouse offices and encrypted messages. Min-suk thought about the pharmaceutical tower where he'd spent 18 years being harvested like a crop. Soon it would be empty, its lights dark, its empire reduced to bankruptcy filings and criminal investigations. Jean was right. Power wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was surgical, patient, and absolutely merciless. And Min-suk was starting to learn how to wield it. Min-suk woke to fever and the sickening realization that his body had betrayed him. The heat crept in slowly at first, warmth spreading through his chest, a restlessness that made his skin feel too tight. He recognized the signs immediately. 18 years of pharmaceutical suppression had made his cycles irregular, unpredictable. But Dr. Han had warned him this might happen. The clean suppressants were letting his body remember what it was supposed to do naturally. He made it to the bathroom before the first wave hit, gripping the marble counter as his reflection stared back. Flushed cheeks, dilated pupils. The glassy look of an omega whose biology had just overridden every rational thought. The scent started next, pheromones flooding the air with an intensity that would reach every alpha in the penthouse within minutes. Including Jean. Panic rose in Min-suk's throat, metallic and choking. He knew what happened during heats. Han Seong had been very clear about omega biology, about how alphas responded to the chemical call, about vulnerability and claiming in bonds that couldn't be broken. They'd kept him so heavily suppressed he'd never experienced a full cycle, but they'd made sure he understood what it meant. Property. Possession. Inevitability. His hands shook as he grabbed his phone, trying to think through the haze. He needed to lock himself in, needed to. The bedroom door opened. Min-suk spun around, back pressed against the bathroom counter, every muscle tensed for fight or flight. Jean stood in the doorway, perfectly still, and Min-suk watched his nostrils flare as the scent hit him. The alpha's pupils dilated, and for a terrifying moment, Min-suk saw the biological imperative flicker across his face. Want, need, the instinct to respond to an omega in heat. Then Jean took a deliberate step backward. I'm leaving. His voice was rougher than usual, strained. Dr. Han is on her way. She'll bring everything you need, suppressants, nesting materials, food, water. Taemin will guard your door from the outside. No one else comes in. Wait, Min-suk's voice broke. You're not. No. Jean's jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. I won't touch you unless you ask me to. And right now you can't ask. Not when your biology is making decisions for you. But Min-suk struggled to form coherent thoughts through the fever. Alphas don't just walk away from. I do. Jean was already moving backward into the hallway, putting distance between them with visible effort. You're not property, Min-suk. Not anymore. Not to me. The door closed, and Min-suk heard the lock engage from the outside. He stood there, shaking, trying to understand what had just happened. Jean had left, had actually turned around and walked away from an unmated omega in heat, which went against every biological and social instinct that alphas were raised with. The heat intensified over the next hour, and Min-suk barely made it to the bed before the full force hit. His body felt like it was burning from the inside out, every nerve ending screaming for something he'd been taught to expect but never experienced. The scent was overwhelming now, calling for an alpha that wasn't coming. A knock on the door made him flinch. Min-suk is SI, it's Dr. Han. Her voice was calm, professional. I'm leaving supplies outside your door. The suppressants are the fast-acting kind. They'll take the edge off in 30 minutes. There's also bedding, pillows, and food that won't upset your stomach. Min-suk crawled to the door, cracking it open just enough to pull the supplies inside. Dr. Han was already gone, understanding that even her presence might be too much stimulation right now. He took the suppressants with shaking hands, then dragged the bedding to the corner and started building a nest on instinct alone. Pillows arranged just so, blankets layered for security and comfort, creating a small fortress against the vulnerability. The door to the hallway opened, and Min-suk tensed until he recognized Jean's footsteps. They stopped just outside the bedroom door. I'm leaving water and more food. Jean's voice was muffled through the wood. The suppressants should help, but Dr. Han says the cycle will need to run its course. 2 to 3 days, most likely. Minsuk pressed his hand against the door, feeling the solid wood between them. Where are you? My office. Down the hall. A pause. Far enough that I won't be tempted. Close enough that you're protected. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Seojin's voice was firm. Every alpha in a 10-block radius can probably sense you right now. The penthouse is locked down. No one gets in. No one gets near you. The suppressants were starting to work, dulling the worst of the heat's edge, but leaving Minsuk clearer-headed. He slid down to sit with his back against the door, knees pulled to his chest. On the other side, he heard the faint sound of Seojin doing the same. Hanseong used to tell me about heats, Minsuk said quietly. About how dangerous they were. How alphas couldn't control themselves. How omegas became property the moment they presented. Hanseong lied about a lot of things. Did they? Minsuk's voice cracked. You're an alpha. I can feel what this is doing to you, even through the door. The instinct to respond, to claim. Is my problem to control, not yours. Seojin's voice was steady despite the strain in it. I'm not some animal that loses all reason because of pheromones. Neither is any other alpha worth knowing. What Hanseong taught you is justification for abuse, not biology. Minsuk closed his eyes, processing that. You're in pain. I can hear it in your voice. I've been in pain before. I'll survive. A soft sound, like Seojin's shifting position. Your safety is more important than my comfort. Why? The question came out smaller than Minsuk intended. Why does it matter so much to you? Seojin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something raw underneath the control. Because no one should have the power to take your choices away. Not Hanseong, not Park, not me. Especially not me. You've spent 18 years being treated like property. I won't add to that, no matter what my instincts are screaming. Minsuk felt something break open in his chest. Not the heat, but something deeper. Trust, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding that protection didn't always mean possession. Will you stay? Minsuk asked. On the other side of the door? As long as you need me to. The 3 days passed in a haze of heat and suppressants and quiet conversations through the door. Seojin brought supplies every few hours, always announcing himself, always leaving them outside and waiting until Minsuk confirmed he'd retrieved them. They talked about small things, books, Seoul's weather, the street food Seojin promised to buy Minsuk when this was over. They didn't talk about Hanseong or Park or the war that was still burning down a pharmaceutical empire. On the third morning, Minsuk woke to find the fever gone, his head clear, his body his own again. He showered, dressed in clean clothes, and finally opened the bedroom door. Seojin was exactly where he'd promised, sitting with his back against the wall across from the bedroom, laptop balanced on his knees, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw shadowed with stubble, but when he saw Minsuk, relief flooded his expression. It's over, Minsuk said softly. Good. Seojin closed the laptop and stood with visible effort. Dr. Han will want to check your vitals. Make sure everything's stabilized properly. Minsuk stepped closer, studying him. You stayed out here the whole time. I said I would. You could have gone to your room. Locked yourself away somewhere more comfortable. No. Seojin's voice was absolute. I told you I'd be close enough to protect you. I keep my promises. Minsuk looked at this alpha who'd found him dying in the snow, who'd declared war on a pharmaceutical empire for him, who'd spent 3 days sitting outside his door in discomfort rather than violate his trust, who'd proven that protection didn't require possession, that strength could be gentle, that alphas could choose control over instinct. Thank you, Minsuk said, and meant it for everything, the rescue, the revenge, the respect. Seojin's expression softened into something almost vulnerable. You don't need to thank me for basic decency. Yes, I do. Because you showed me it exists. Minsuk managed a small smile. And because I'm starting to believe I deserve it. Seojin reached out slowly, giving Minsuk time to step back if he wanted. When he didn't, Seojin's hand settled on his shoulder, warm, steady grounding. You deserve more than decency. You deserve everything they took from you and more. Minsuk nodded, feeling something shift between them. Not a bond, nothing biological or forced. Just trust, earned through patience and restraint and 3 days of choosing respect over instinct. Partners? Minsuk asked, echoing the promise from weeks ago. Seojin's smile was genuine this time, reaching his eyes. Partners. In everything. Minsuk wasn't looking for secrets. He was looking for a pen. Seojin had asked him to sign some paperwork. Official documents that would legally sever any remaining ties between Minsuk and Hanseong Pharmaceutical. And then been called away for an urgent phone call. Minsuk had gone to Seojin's desk for a pen, opening drawers with the casual permission of someone who'd spent 6 weeks living in the penthouse. The photograph was tucked in the back of the bottom drawer, hidden beneath old contracts and business cards. Minsuk wouldn't have seen it at all if the drawer hadn't stuck, forcing him to pull it fully out to unjam it. The frame was simple, black lacquer, and the glass was fingerprint-free like someone handled it carefully. The photograph showed two young men. One Minsuk recognized immediately as Seojin, maybe 10 years younger, less controlled, still carrying softness around his eyes. The other was shorter, with the same sharp features but gentler somehow, smiling at the camera with an openness that suggested he hadn't yet learned to be afraid of the world. Minsuk turned the frame over. Written on the back in careful handwriting, Kang Seo-woo, 1998 to 2019. 21 years old. Dead for 7 years. I should have put that somewhere safer. Minsuk nearly dropped the frame. Seojin stood in the doorway, phone still in his hand, expression carefully neutral in the way it got when he was feeling too much to show it. I'm sorry, I wasn't snooping, Minsuk started, but Seojin waved him off. I know. I asked you to use my desk. He moved into the room, setting his phone down with deliberate care. That's my younger brother. Seo-woo. Minsuk looked down at the photograph again, at the younger man's smile. He looks like you. Everyone said that. Same features, different temperaments. He was better than me, kinder, softer, saw the good in people even when there wasn't any to see. Seojin's voice was even, but something underneath it was cracking. He was an Omega. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Minsuk's fingers tightened on the frame. He died 7 years ago. Suppressant toxicity. Seojin sat down in the chair across from the desk, and for the first time since Minsuk had known him, he looked tired. Not physically exhausted, but soul-weary. Black market medication that was half industrial solvent and half luck. It destroyed his liver over 6 months, and by the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. Minsuk's chest constricted. I'm so sorry. He was 21. Still in university, studying literature because he wanted to teach children. Seojin's hands were clenched on the chair arms, knuckles white. I was building my empire, making connections, establishing power. I thought I was protecting him by making money, by creating influence. I didn't realize I needed to protect him from the things I was too busy to notice. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? Seojin's smile was bitter. I knew the suppressants he was taking were cheap. He was a student, trying to manage on his allowance without asking me for help, because he knew I was busy. I should have checked. Should have made sure he had proper medication. Should have. His voice broke, and he stopped, taking a breath that looked like it cost him. Minsuk set the photograph down carefully and moved around the desk, sitting in the chair beside Seojin's. He didn't touch, didn't intrude, just offered proximity. The suppressants came from a pharmaceutical company, Seojin continued after a moment. Not Hanseong, a smaller operation that's been out of business for 5 years now. But they all work the same way. Take vulnerable omegas, exploit their biology, profit from their suffering, and when someone dies, call it acceptable risk. Collateral damage. That's why you picked me up in the snow. Minsuk's voice was quiet, understanding clicking into place. Not just because I needed help. I picked you up because leaving you would have meant I learned nothing from losing Seo-woo. Seojin finally looked at him, and his eyes were raw. I couldn't save my brother. I was too late, too distracted, too fucking proud to notice he was dying until there was nothing left to save. But I could save you. And I could make sure the people who profit from Omega's suffering understand there are consequences. The war on Hanseong isn't just about me. No. Seojin's honesty was brutal. It's about Seo-woo and every other Omega who died because pharmaceutical companies decided their lives were worth less than profit margins. It's about the system that let it happen, the politicians who took bribes to look away, the doctors who knew and said nothing. You were the catalyst, but the rage has been building for 7 years. Minsuk thought about the photograph, about the young man with the gentle smile who'd wanted to teach children, about Seojin, who'd built an empire on violence and control, but couldn't save the one person who mattered most, about how grief sometimes looked like justice, and revenge could be love that had nowhere else to go. He would have liked you, Seojin said suddenly. Seo-woo. He always believed people deserved second chances, that kindness was stronger than cruelty. I think he would have been proud that I'm trying to prove him right. By burning down pharmaceutical companies? By making sure no other Omega ends up like he did. Like you almost did. Seojin's voice was firm again, the crack in his armor sealing over. I couldn't save him. But I can burn down every bastard who profits from Omega's suffering. And I can make sure you get to choose your own life instead of having it stolen piece by piece. Minsuk reached out slowly and took the photograph from the desk, studying Seo Woo's smile again. There was something familiar in it, the cautious hope of someone who'd been hurt but hadn't given up on the world yet. Maybe that was what Seo Jin saw when he looked at Minsuk. A second chance. A way to make the past mean something. Thank you for telling me, Minsuk said, handing the frame back. Seo Jin held it carefully, thumb brushing over his brother's face. You deserve to know. This isn't just about justice anymore. It's personal. He looked up, meeting Minsuk's eyes. For both of us now. Minsuk nodded, feeling the weight of that truth. They were bound together not by biology or circumstance, but by shared understanding of what it meant to survive systems designed to break them. By the ghosts they carried and the futures they were fighting for. I'll help you finish it, Minsuk said quietly. Whatever it takes to make sure Hanseong can't hurt anyone else. For Seo Woo. And for everyone like us. Seo Jin's expression softened into something almost grateful. Partners, then. All the way to the end. All the way to the end, Minsuk agreed. Outside, Seoul glittered in the evening light, oblivious to the promises being made 40 floors above. Inside, two men sat with a photograph between them, a reminder of what they'd lost and what they were fighting for. The war wasn't over. But now Minsuk understood it was never just about revenge. It was about making sure the dead weren't forgotten, and the living got to choose their own stories. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers, and tell me where you're watching from. The news came at 2 a.m., delivered by Taemin's grim expression and a surveillance photo that made Minsuk's blood run cold. Gwangju Syndicate operatives were spotted 3 blocks from here, Taemin said, spreading the images across Seo Jin's desk. 4 of them, armed, doing reconnaissance. They're not being subtle anymore. Park's getting desperate. Seo Jin studied the photos with clinical detachment, but Minsuk saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. Double the security rotation. I want eyes on every entrance, every camera angle. No one gets within 2 blocks without us knowing. Already done. But boss, Taemin hesitated. They're professionals. If they're willing to hit us here, in your own building, Park must have offered them something significant. Let them come. Seo Jin's voice was ice. They'll learn why people don't attack me on my own territory. Minsuk stayed silent until Taemin left, then moved to the window, staring out at Seoul's sleeping skyline. Below, somewhere in those streets, mercenaries were planning an assault. Because of him. Because Seo Jin had picked him up in the snow and decided he was worth protecting. You're thinking too loud, Seo Jin said from the desk. How many people are you risking? Minsuk's voice was quiet. Your guards, Taemin, everyone in this building. How many people might die because you won't give me back? I'm not giving you back. Seo Jin. No. Seo Jin stood, crossing to stand beside him. We've had this conversation. You're not property. There's no giving you back, because you were never theirs to own. Minsuk closed his eyes. But I am a liability. You said it yourself. Park is desperate, which makes him dangerous. If I weren't here. If you weren't here, I'd still be at war with Hanseong. The only difference is I'd have one less reason to be careful about collateral damage. Seo Jin's reflection in the glass was stern. Don't mistake me for a good man, Minsuk. I'm not protecting you because I'm noble. I'm protecting you because I choose to, and I don't make choices lightly. Minsuk wanted to believe that. But when he finally went to bed 2 hours later, he couldn't stop seeing the surveillance photos, couldn't stop calculating the cost of Seo Jin's protection in other people's lives. At 3:47 a.m., Minsuk made his decision. He packed quietly. What little he owned fit into a single backpack. Some clothes Seo Jin had bought him, the suppressants Dr. Han had prescribed, enough money from his small allowance to get him out of Seoul. He moved through the penthouse like a ghost, avoiding the cameras he'd learned the locations of, taking the service stairs instead of the elevator. The security guard in the lobby was reading something on his phone, bored with the late-night shift. Minsuk waited until he turned away, then slipped past toward the side entrance that the building staff used. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands were steady. This was the right choice. The only choice that didn't end with more people dying for him. He made it to the lobby doors before the voice stopped him cold. Going somewhere? Seo Jin stood by the elevator, wearing sleep pants and a t-shirt, hair disheveled like he'd rolled out of bed in a hurry. He wasn't blocking the exit. Wasn't moving to stop Minsuk physically. He just stood there, waiting. How did you? Motion sensors in your room. They alert me if you leave after midnight. Seo Jin's voice was calm, but his eyes were storm-dark. I'm guessing you thought you'd slip out unnoticed. Spare me the argument. Minsuk's grip tightened on his backpack strap. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this to protect you. From what? From them. From Park and his mercenaries and everyone who's going to keep coming as long as I'm here. The words spilled out, desperate. You've risked everything for me, your people, your territory, your reputation. How many more will you sacrifice before you admit I'm not worth it? Seojin moved closer, and Minsuk forced himself not to step back. You think you're a burden. I know I am. The surveillance photos, the increased security, Taemin's worried face every time he briefs you. It's all because of me. Because you made a choice in that alley that's costing you more every day. You're right. Seojin's honesty was brutal. Having you here has complicated my life considerably. It's cost me time, money, resources. I've made enemies out of people I could have negotiated with. I've put my organization on high alert for weeks. Every decision I make now has to account for your safety, which limits my options strategically. Minsuk's chest ached. Then let me go. No. Why not? You just admitted You're also the reason I haven't burned this whole city down. Seojin's voice cracked with something raw and honest. You think you're a burden? You're the only thing keeping me human. Before you, this empire was just violence and profit and revenge that never satisfied. I was drowning in my brother's ghost and the rage of not saving him. Then I found you in that alley, and suddenly I had something worth protecting. Someone who made the war mean something beyond destruction. Minsuk stared at him, seeing something in Seojin's expression he'd never seen before. Vulnerability, fear, the desperate hope of someone who'd found something precious and couldn't bear to lose it. Every morning you're still here. I wake up knowing I did one thing right, Seojin continued. One thing Seo Woo would be proud of. You're not my burden, Minsuk. You're my proof that I'm more than the monster soul thinks I am. That I can build something instead of just breaking things. I'm not your redemption, Minsuk whispered. No, you're your own person with your own choices. Which is why I'm not stopping you. Seojin gestured toward the door. If you want to leave, leave. I won't chase you, won't force you, won't track you down. But understand that if you walk out that door, you're not saving me from anything. You're just confirming what everyone already thinks, that I'm not worth staying for. The lobby was very quiet. Outside, Seoul was dark and indifferent. Minsuk looked at the door, then back at Seojin, seeing 7 weeks of careful protection, patient revenge, and a war fought not for glory but for justice. Seeing an alpha who'd sat outside his door during heat, who'd revealed his deepest grief, who'd given him choices when everyone else had only taken them away. I don't want to be the reason people die, Minsuk said finally. Then be the reason they live. Seojin's voice was soft. Help me finish what we started. Help me make sure Hanseong can never do this to anyone else. Help me prove that Seo Woo's death meant something, and your survival means even more. And if the Gwangju Syndicate comes, then we face them together. As partners. The way we promised. Seojin extended his hand. Not grabbing, not demanding, just offering. Stay. Not because you owe me. Not because you're too weak to leave. Stay because I'm asking. Because we're not finished yet. Because I need you here. Minsuk looked at the offered hand, at Seojin's expression that was trying so hard to stay controlled, but failing around the edges. He thought about running, about safety purchased with loneliness, about all the ways he'd learned to survive by becoming invisible. Then he thought about the past 7 weeks. About Seojin teaching him that protection didn't mean possession. About learning to use his knowledge to fight back instead of just endure. About the photograph of Seo Woo and the promise that the dead wouldn't be forgotten. About partnership freely chosen. Minsuk dropped his backpack and took Seojin's hand. I'm staying. The relief that flooded Seojin's face was visceral, human, real. He pulled Minsuk into an embrace that was tight enough to hurt and gentle enough to heal. And Minsuk let himself be held by someone who'd chosen him not despite the danger, but because of who he was. Thank you, Seojin breathed against his hair. Don't thank me yet, Minsuk said, echoing Seojin's own words from weeks ago. We still have a war to finish. Seojin's laugh was quiet and genuine. Yes, we do. Together. They stood in the lobby as Seoul began to wake around them. 2 people bound by choice rather than biology, by shared purpose rather than obligation. The Gwangju Syndicate was coming. Park was desperate. The war was entering its final, most dangerous phase. But Minsuk was staying. And that somehow made everything else bearable. The attack came at 4:17 a.m., during the shift change when security was briefly at its weakest. Taemin's voice crackled through Seojin's phone with clipped urgency. Multiple hostiles, south and west entrances. They've breached the lobby. Protocol Omega, Get Minsuk to the panic room now. Seojin was already moving, grabbing Minsuk from where he'd been reading in the living room. Come on. No questions, just move. They ran down the hallway toward the reinforced room Seojin had built into the penthouse's core. Steel-lined walls, independent air supply, communications equipment. Minsuk had seen it during the tour, but never thought they'd actually need it. Seojin's hand was iron around his wrist, pulling him forward as somewhere below them, alarms began to shriek. How many? Minsuk gasped. Doesn't matter. You're getting locked down. Seojin punched in the code, and the heavy door swung open. The panic room was smaller than Minsuk expected. Maybe 10 feet square, lined with monitors showing security feeds and shelves stocked with supplies. In the corner, incongruous among the emergency rations and medical kits, was the laboratory equipment Seojin had installed 3 weeks ago when Minsuk had mentioned wanting to understand the compounds they'd used on him. Stay here. Don't open this door for anyone but me or Taemin. Seojin's voice was commanding, absolute. The air supply is independent. You'll be safe. What about you? I'm going to remind these bastards why people don't attack me in my own home. Seojin's smile was sharp and dangerous. Then softer. I'll come back for you. I promise. The door sealed with a hydraulic hiss, and Minsuk was alone with the monitors and his racing heart. The security feeds showed chaos unfolding across the penthouse. 8 mercenaries in tactical gear moved through the space with professional efficiency, weapons raised. Seojin's guards engaged them in the main corridor, and the sound of gunfire filtered through even the panic room's thick walls. Minsuk watched Seojin emerge from cover, moving with lethal grace. He took down 2 mercenaries before the others adapted, falling back into defensive positions. Taemin appeared on another feed, coordinating the remaining guards, trying to contain the breach. Then Minsuk saw the canisters. 3 mercenaries pulled cylindrical objects from their tactical vests, pulled pins, and threw them into the hallway. Gas began to pour out, thick, purple-gray, spreading with unnatural speed through the ventilation system. On the monitors, Minsuk watched Seojin's guards start to collapse, one by one, clutching at their throats. But Seojin and Taemin stayed standing, though Seojin staggered, clearly affected but still conscious. The mercenaries moved forward, and Minsuk understood with horrifying clarity. The gas was designed to incapacitate Omegas while leaving Alphas functional enough to witness what came next. Clever, one of the mercenaries said, voice picked up by the security audio. Chemical restraint. Park wanted the Omega intact for transport. Can't do that if everyone's dead. Seojin swung at the nearest mercenary, connecting with enough force to snap the man's head back. But he was slower than usual, his movements labored. Another mercenary hit him from behind with a baton, and Seojin went to one knee. Where is he? The lead mercenary pressed a gun to Seojin's temple. The Omega. Where did you hide him? Go to hell. Seojin's voice was rough, strained from the gas. We'll find him anyway. Park's paying us enough to tear this place apart. The mercenary gestured to his team. Search every room. He's here somewhere. Minsuk watched them spread out, methodically checking spaces, moving closer to the panic room. The monitors showed Taemin unconscious in the hallway, 2 guards down, Seojin being restrained by 3 mercenaries while a 4th searched him for weapons. They had maybe 5 minutes before the mercenaries found the panic room, and Seojin was in no condition to stop them. Minsuk's hands were shaking as he turned away from the monitors, frantically trying to think. The panic room had weapons, communications equipment, emergency supplies, but nothing that would help against trained mercenaries with chemical weapons and overwhelming tactical advantage. His eyes landed on the laboratory equipment. Beakers, a portable spectrometer, basic synthesis tools, reagents Seojin had ordered for him to study pharmaceutical compounds. Minsuk had been using it to understand what Hanseong had done to him, breaking down the suppressants they'd used, analyzing the enzymes they'd extracted. He knew these compounds, had them cataloged, documented, understood on a molecular level after 18 years of forced intimacy with pharmaceutical chemistry, including the gas currently incapacitating everyone in the penthouse. Minsuk's mind raced, pulling up memories of extraction procedures, of the compounds they'd synthesized from his biology, of the chemical structures Dr. Choi had shown him when explaining why his enzymes were so valuable. The purple-gray gas, he'd seen that color before, in the pharmaceutical wing during one of their behavioral modification experiments. They'd called it Compound S7, a suppressant delivery mechanism that worked through inhalation rather than injection. He knew the molecular structure, which meant he could potentially synthesize a neutralizing agent. His hands moved before his conscious mind fully caught up, grabbing reagents from the shelves. The spectrometer powered on with a soft hum, and Min-suk worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd spent years being subjected to pharmaceutical experimentation. He understood these compounds not from textbooks but from lived experience. Every forced injection, every extraction, every time they'd modified his biochemistry had taught him something. The base compound was simple, an alkaline buffer to neutralize the acidic suppressant catalyst. But the delivery mechanism was the problem. He needed something that would disperse through the ventilation system, counteracting the gas quickly enough to help Seo-jin and the others. On the monitor, the mercenaries were getting closer. One stood directly outside the panic room, examining the wall. "There's something here. Hidden door reinforced. This has to be it. Can you breach it? Give me 3 minutes with the plasma cutter." Min-suk had less than 3 minutes. He combined the alkaline compound with a volatile carrier, something that would vaporize rapidly and spread through the same ventilation system the mercenaries had used. His hands were steady now, muscle memory from years of watching Hanseong's chemists' work taking over. Mix, heat, cool, transfer. The spectrometer confirmed the molecular structure was stable. The neutralizing agent glowed faintly blue in the beaker. "Min-suk." Seo-jin's voice came through the panic room's intercom, strained and desperate. "If you can hear me, don't open the door. No matter what they do, stay inside." Min-suk looked at the monitors. Seo-jin was on his knees, bleeding from a cut above his eye, surrounded by mercenaries. Taemin and the guards were still unconscious. The man with the plasma cutter had started working on the panic room door, metal beginning to glow orange under the concentrated heat. Min-suk made his decision. The panic room had its own ventilation controls, a failsafe to prevent external contamination. Min-suk overrode the safety protocols, reversing the airflow to push out instead of in. He connected the neutralizing agent to the ventilation line, then opened the valve. Blue vapor began to pour into the penthouse. "What the hell?" One of the mercenaries closest to event stumbled, coughing. The purple-gray gas started to dissipate, neutralized by Min-suk's compound. Within seconds, the air was clearing. Seo-jin's head snapped up, awareness flooding back into his eyes. He moved before the mercenaries could react, breaking free of their grip and driving his elbow into the nearest man's throat. Taemin stirred on the floor, reaching for his weapon. The mercenary with the plasma cutter turned toward the vent, understanding dawning too late. "The Omega, he's countering the gas. Abort, we need to." Seo-jin's fist connected with his jaw, and the man went down hard. What followed was brutal and efficient. With the chemical advantage neutralized, Seo-jin and his recovering guards overwhelmed the mercenaries in under 2 minutes. The fight was vicious but one-sided. The mercenaries had been trained for Omega retrieval, not direct combat with an enraged Alpha protecting his territory. When the last mercenary was restrained, Seo-jin went directly to the panic room. The door was half melted from the plasma cutter, and he forced it open with his bare hands, metal screaming in protest. Min-suk stood by the laboratory equipment, holding an empty beaker, looking less like a victim and more like someone who'd just won a war with chemistry. "You synthesized a counteragent," Seo-jin said, voice full of something between awe and pride. "I knew the compounds. Hanseong used variants on me for years." Min-suk set down the beaker carefully. "I just reversed the molecular structure and weaponized it." Seo-jin started to laugh, exhausted, relieved, genuine. "You just saved all our lives with pharmaceutical chemistry. I learned from the best. Unfortunately, the best were using it to torture me, so I got very good at understanding how it worked." Min-suk stepped over the ruined door. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing that won't heal." Seo-jin pulled him into a tight embrace, ignoring the blood and sweat and chemical residue. "You're brilliant. Terrifying and brilliant." Min-suk hugged him back, feeling the adrenaline start to fade into exhausted victory. "Partners. Partners," Seo-jin confirmed. "In absolutely everything." The aftermath of violence was always quieter than the violence itself. Min-suk sat in Seo-jin's office while medical personnel treated the wounded and police processed the scene. The mercenaries were zip-tied in the hallway, awaiting transport, their tactical confidence replaced by the hollow-eyed look of people who'd realized too late they'd chosen the wrong target. Taemin coordinated with the authorities. Seo-jin had enough political capital that the attack would be recorded as an attempted corporate espionage gone wrong, the details conveniently sanitized. "Drink this." Dr. Han pressed a glass of water into Min-suk's hands. "The adrenaline crash is going to hit soon. When it does, you'll want to be hydrated." Min-suk accepted it numbly, watching through the windows as Seoul began to wake up. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting the glass towers in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere down there, people were starting their ordinary days, completely unaware that 40 floors above them, a pharmaceutical empire had just collapsed into ash. Seojeon's phone buzzed. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, then ended the call with a smile that was pure satisfaction. That was my contact in the prosecutor's office. Park Jae-sung was arrested 20 minutes ago at his home. They're charging him with corporate fraud, illegal human experimentation, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 15 other counts. He'll have lawyers, Taemin said from the doorway, sporting a bandage on his temple. Good ones. He'll need them. The evidence we've compiled over the past 2 months is airtight. Medical records, financial documents, witness testimony. Even the best lawyers can't argue with that volume of proof. Seojeon's expression was carved marble. Park is going to spend the rest of his life in prison, and Hanseong Pharmaceutical will be dismantled for parts by the end of the quarter. Min-suk set down the water glass carefully. It's over. Yes. Seojeon crossed to sit beside him, moving stiffly from the fight. Park gambled everything on getting you back, and he lost. Without you, Hanseong's suppressant division collapses. Without their flagship product, the company follows. The investors are already fleeing. By this time next week, Hanseong will exist only in bankruptcy filings. And the mercenaries? Min-suk gestured toward the hallway. They're cooperating fully, giving testimony about who hired them, the briefing they received, Park's explicit orders to retrieve you by any means necessary. Taemin's smile was grim. They know cooperation is their only chance at reduced sentences. Lee Dong-wook is already claiming he had no idea the retrieval was illegal. Coward, Seojeon muttered. The Gwangju Syndicate's reputation won't recover from this. No one hires mercenaries who fail this spectacularly and then turn informant. Min-suk listened to them discuss the fallout with professional detachment, parsing through consequences and political maneuvering. This was Seojeon's world, where violence was a tool, leverage was currency, and wars were won through patience and overwhelming preparation. Min-suk had been living in it for 2 months now, learning its rhythms, understanding its brutal logic. But he'd also changed it. The neutralizing agent he'd synthesized had proven something important. He wasn't just a victim to be protected. He was someone with skills, knowledge, agency. Someone who could fight back using the very things Hanseong had used to hurt him. I need to see the lab equipment, Min-suk said suddenly. Seojeon raised an eyebrow. Now. While everything's fresh in my mind. Min-suk stood, and Dr. Han didn't try to stop him. I synthesized that counteragent in 3 minutes under extreme pressure. Imagine what I could do with time, proper equipment, actual planning. Understanding flickered across Seojeon's face. You want to weaponize what Hanseong did to you. I want to make sure no pharmaceutical company can ever do this again. Min-suk's voice was steady, certain. They exploited my biology because I didn't understand it well enough to defend myself. But I understand it now. Every extraction, every experiment, every compound, I know how it works. I can use that knowledge to create safe suppressants, real treatments that don't destroy people from the inside out. Seojeon's expression shifted into something Min-suk had never seen before. Pure, unfiltered pride. You want to build something. I want to build what Hanseong should have been if they'd cared about omegas instead of profit margins. Min-suk met his eyes. And I want to do it with you. Your resources, your protection, your network. My knowledge, my biology, my understanding of what omegas actually need. Partners. Equal partners. Taemin was grinning openly now. Boss, I think he just proposed a business venture. I think he did. Seojeon stood, moving to stand beside Min-suk. You're talking about creating an entirely new pharmaceutical division. Research, development, clinical trials. All of it ethical, transparent, designed by someone who actually understands omega biology from lived experience. Yes. Min-suk's heart was racing, but not from fear. From possibility. From the intoxicating realization that he could take everything Hanseong had stolen from him and transform it into something that helped instead of hurt. We'd need laboratory space, researchers I can trust, funding for proper trials. But we could do it right. Make suppressants that don't poison people. Create treatments that actually work. Prove that profit and ethics don't have to be mutually exclusive. How long would this take? Years. Maybe a decade to do it properly. Min-suk smiled slightly. But we have time now, don't we? Park is gone, Hanseong is finished, and I'm not running anymore. Seojeon was quiet for a long moment, studying him. Then he extended his hand, formal and serious. Partners. Equal partnership, equal decision-making authority, equal stakes. We build this together, or we don't build it at all. Minsuk took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars that told stories of a different kind of survival. Together, then. All of it. They shook on it, and Taemin actually applauded. This is going to destroy what's left of the black market pharmaceutical trade. You realize that, right? Legal, ethical suppressants that actually work? You'll put half the underground out of business. Good. Seojin's smile was sharp. They've been profiting from Omega's suffering long enough. Time someone showed them there's a better way. 3 hours later, after the police had left and the penthouse had been cleaned and secured, Minsuk found himself standing at the windows again. The sun was fully up now, Seoul gleaming in the morning light. Somewhere down there, news outlets were reporting on Park's arrest, on Hanseong's collapse, on the mysterious circumstances surrounding the pharmaceutical giant's downfall. They didn't know the real story. Didn't know about the Omega who'd been harvested for 18 years, or the Alpha who'd declared war to save him, or the partnership forged in snow and synthesized in a panic room during an assault. That story was theirs alone. Seojin joined him at the window, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Minsuk, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe. What are you thinking? Seojin asked finally. That 2 months ago, I was dying in an alley. Now I'm standing in a penthouse, planning to build a pharmaceutical company that might actually help people. Minsuk took a sip of coffee. It feels impossible. The best things usually do, right before they become real. Seojin's voice was soft. You've come a long way from the person I found in the snow. We both have. Minsuk looked at him. This Alpha who'd chosen patience over rage, protection over possession, partnership over power. You could have just destroyed Hanseong and moved on. But you waited, planned, made sure it was thorough. Because you deserve thorough. You deserve justice that meant something, not just revenge that felt good. Seojin set down his coffee cup and turned to face Minsuk fully. I told you once that you were the reason I hadn't burned the whole city down. I meant it. You gave me something to build toward instead of just things to destroy. Minsuk smiled, genuine and real. So what do we build next? A kingdom, Seojin said simply. Built on ash and better intentions. A pharmaceutical company that doesn't exploit omegas, that provides real care instead of corporate predation. We'll use everything we learned from Hanseong, their supply chains, their research, their market position, and do it right this time. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Seojin extended his hand again, formal despite everything they'd been through. Partners? In absolutely everything. Minsuk took his hand, holding on. Partners. In everything. Below them, Seoul continued its endless motion. Unaware that in a penthouse built like a fortress, 2 people were planning to reshape an entire industry. The pharmaceutical empire that had profited from Omega's suffering was gone, reduced to bankruptcy and criminal charges. And in its place, something new was beginning, built not on exploitation but on understanding, not on cruelty but on consent. Minsuk was wearing one of Seojin's shirts under a lab coat, still stained with chemical residue from the synthesis that had saved them all. He looked less like the dying Omega from the snow and more like someone who'd discovered that survival wasn't the same as living, that knowledge could be power when wielded with purpose. To new beginnings, Seojin said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. To kingdoms built on ash, Minsuk agreed, clinking his cup against Seojin's. And the partnerships that make them possible. They drank to that, watching the sun climb higher over Seoul, painting their future in shades of gold and possibility.